In this session, we shall be talking about Unit 10 in the course MGPE 14, and the topic is Gandhian Lifestyle and Livelihoods. I'm Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya from the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, IGNOU. So basically, we'll try to understand the consequences of modern lifestyles, which are a product of the tremendous changes that have taken place in the world post the Industrial Revolution. And then we will try and appreciate the relevance of what Gandhi prescribed by way of lifestyle and livelihoods in order to understand and in order to help us find a way out of the morass in which humanity finds itself currently. If we look at human history and the state of the planet, we see that human activity has fundamentally changed our planet. Human beings live on every continent, and at least 53% of the planet's viable land surface bears our direct impact. We have influenced Earth's ecosystems, its geochemistry, its oceans, and its atmosphere. In other words, the impact of human activity on the planet has been so massive that some scientists actually consider it as a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. So basically, human beings have fundamentally altered the Earth, altered its ecosystem. And these alterations ultimately, as we shall see, have a very, very deleterious, have a very, very negative impact on the survival of the planet as such and of our species as well. The two major revolutions that changed the face of the planet were the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. So human beings have lived on this planet for a very, very long time, but it was only when the domestication of plants and animals started that this gave rise to a series of river valley civilizations in Asia and Africa some 3,500 years ago. All of you would have read about this in school. Permanent human settlements emerged. However, these settlements were essentially agricultural, since they were based on river valleys and banks. However, some of these settlements, some of these civilizations produced enough surpluses, sufficient agricultural surpluses, to form urban centers. For example, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley. Except for the Indian and Chinese civilizations, all these ancient civilizations became the victims of time. However, they left behind a very rich agricultural heritage that remained the cornerstone of human life until the end of the 17th century. The Industrial Revolution that took place in Europe created or caused massive changes, and in the span of just 3 centuries, or rather 1/10 of the period that the agricultural revolution took to mature, it completely transformed the shape of this world. It made the Western industrialized countries rich and developed, and converted the agriculture-based civilizations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America into fiefs or colonies which supplied the European industry the raw materials, labor, and market. So you are all familiar with the history of the colonial undertaking, the way in which the civilizations or the societies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America became colonies and basically supplied the European market. We find that practically the whole world came under the command of the West. Western people, Western ideas, and Western goods reigned supreme. The developing countries tried to catch up with the industrialized countries, and a few of them made remarkable progress. But as we see around the world, many of them are struggling very hard to make both ends meet, to ensure that their people get the basic items or get the basic standard of living necessary for a decent life. And we find that there's a huge natural resources crunch that has made the task of development slow and costly. The old-style industrialization resulted in tremendous environmental impacts. So we see that environmental pollution has generated or created many, many problems. However, in the contemporary times, we have the information revolution that has made the economic, social, and technological institutions and the entire process of production and consumption of the past obsolete in a sense. So there is a dire need, or there is an urgent need, to rethink. A new paradigm of thinking is necessary. A new model of development is necessary. And we need a new approach to nature, a new way of doing things, and a new style of life and living. For the simple reason that the previous one has become completely untenable and unsustainable. The industrial era and its mode of production has made this earth quite uninhabitable. We see that the biosphere that sustains life on planet Earth is becoming imbalanced. Air and water are becoming polluted. The land is becoming lifeless, and innumerable plants and animals that keep the ecosystem in a healthy state are fast disappearing. This is an extremely disturbing state of affairs. We live with the fear of climate change, ozone layer depletion, overpopulation, incurable diseases, hunger and malnutrition, and violence against nature and human beings. The recent COVID crisis that has come to terrorize, in a sense, the entire world has made us very much aware of the kind of violence that we have perpetrated against nature and the impact that this then has on the species as such. Our civilization, according to Mahatma Gandhi, has really become a disease. So it is the civilization itself that has become a disease, rather than civilization finding cures for various diseases. And the continuance of the earth as a livable planet can no longer be taken for granted. What is this Western way of life that was so critiqued by Gandhi and other scholars? We find that materialism, the importance that is given to the expansion of needs, consumption, the need to possess more and more material goods, is really at the cornerstone of the modern way of life that was promoted by the West, and more, which has caught on in the non-West as well. So we are all caught in this trap of materialism, wanting to possess more and more, wanting to consume more and more, and because of this, what we end up doing is inflicting huge violence not only on nature, but also on ourselves. Prosperity is the major preoccupation. However, this endless pursuit of prosperity, this endless pursuit to acquire more and more, it actually results in lowering the quality of life, fostering class divisions, and also causing international tensions. This is absolutely inevitable when there are human beings, or when there is one section of humanity which has almost insurmountable wealth, and there is another section which is festering in conditions of poverty. This is bound to cause tensions between communities, tensions between nations. The root cause of this is the notion of an expanding economy, an economy that can endlessly expand to keep on producing and keep on consuming. If the view is that civilization can only be kept going by perpetually increasing the consumption of goods and services and running the world's machinery at full speed, where are the raw materials going to come from? So this notion of ever-expanding production, which will be kept going by ever-expanding consumption, basically does not address the issue of where the raw materials come from. We can think of this in a sense as a devouring economy, an economy that is literally eating us up alive. The rising demands of the awakening East and the rest of the world for the Earth's resources has come into conflict with those of the West. The rates of consumption of food and raw materials in the USA, for example, is now so high that it is drawing upon outside resources at an alarming rate. Not a very long time ago, the USA was practically self-supporting, but today it is dependent upon world supplies for its raw materials, while its consumption is equal to that of the rest of the world put together. This is something really that is a cause to ponder, a fact to ponder about. The devouring economy that we referred to is essentially an exploitative economy. It stimulates by artificial means, including pressurized advertising, the cultivation of habits of extravagance without any reference to the good life, to the social good, or the needs and the welfare of mankind or humankind as a whole. If we stop and reflect at our own practices, we find that we have become victims of this devouring economy, which enjoins upon us to consume more and more goods. Think about the amount of unnecessary items that we purchase, things we really could do without, but because it has become a compulsion to consume more and more, we are also caught into this trap of an economic system which is basically an unsustainable one. Let us discuss some of the paradoxes in the present day lifestyle, some of the contradictions that we see in the present day. We see that on the one hand there has been decolonization, the death of imperialism, the rise and fall of communism, but at the same time we find that the USA has emerged as a leader of a unipolar world. We see development of science and technology, the emergence of a technological mentality, and also a crass materialism, which we've been talking about. We see that there has been a decline of religion and spirituality. More and more people are exiting formal religion. We see the spread of violence and the development of non-violent alternatives. Point, or probably the last point, that the seeking of non-violent alternatives is something that is ultimately going to help humankind to get out of this trap of consumption, get out of this trap of crass materialism. We find that while absolute poverty has decreased globally, relative poverty has increased. In other words, the inequalities that we were referring to earlier have increased to a great extent. We find that more people have become literate. However, access to information and technology has become concentrated and centralized. More and more countries have become democratized, but at the same time, there is greater concentration of power. We find that there is a communication explosion. However, at the same time, growing alienation and lack of communication at the individual level has become rampant. Alienation and dehumanization of labor is something that we're all familiar with. We find that people are doing, to a great extent, meaningless work, which gives little or no spiritual satisfaction or social connection. The acceptance of the inevitability of human fragmentation in the interest of progress. This is a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. The root problem of our time is how to pass from a quantitative civilization, which fragments the human person, to a qualitative civilization, which makes whole persons. In other words, how do we move from just counting what we have to actually looking at the value of what we have? This is something very, very important. Let's look now at the Gandhian alternative to this extremely consumption-driven and materialistic way of life that we have outlined so far. Gandhi's ideal social order is a non-violent, non-exploitative, humanistic, and egalitarian society. These are very, very big words, but very, very meaningful ones. And we need to think about each one of these very, very carefully in order to understand the mess that we are in now and the way out of this mess that human beings have created for themselves. Gandhian approach is through the avenue of truth and non-violence. Its goal is the advancement of humanity on its road to progress by strengthening the character and the individual development of personality of every single person. And very importantly, no one's gain should be anyone's loss, either financial, physical, moral, or spiritual. How do we conduct our lifestyle in a manner that is compatible with non-violence? This is a very, very important question. We see that when we conceive development along Western lines, we can see that the Western way of life cannot be permanent and will be incompatible with peace if it spreads throughout all humankind. And the reason for this is that it is based on use of non-renewable resources, and it rejects any idea of voluntary self-limitation. In other words, the engine of growth, constantly growing, expanding, consuming, this lies at the core of the Western way of life and thinking. The contemporary way of life rapidly depletes the power of the earth to sustain it and piles up even more insoluble problems for each succeeding generation. Hence, this is a violent way. It is an urgent need of the hour to follow a non-violent way. It is not merely the violence of humans against humans, but also the violence of humans in our dealings with living nature and with the limited and finite resources of the earth. So the Gandhian notion of non-violence is not just about violence and non-violence in regard to human beings. It is what human beings actually do as part of the earth. How do they treat Mother Earth? How do they extract resources? How do they exploit nature? How do they exploit other living beings? All of this comes under the definition of violence and non-violence. So it is this expanded idea of non-violence that we really need to foreground in order to understand the way forward through Gandhian alternatives. For example, if we look at agriculture, agricultural research all over the world, we find, adopts methods that in a sense are a battle with nature. Human beings seem to be in a kind of a war with nature. Insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, artificial fertilizers, we find that all of these modern methods are premised upon a model of violence rather than coexistence and harmony. And this is not just true in agriculture, this is true in all aspects of human life. The threefold crisis of this modern world, we can sum it up as the crisis of resources exhaustion, the ecological crisis, and the crisis of human alienation and disorientation. All these huge crises require work with a new orientation. One of the very, very important things that was flagged by Gandhi was the limitation of wants. Let us discuss this in some detail. You all know that human wants are unlimited. However, the means to satisfy these wants are limited. And the discipline of economics is based on this fundamental understanding of unlimited wants and limited means. Human beings strive or try to get the maximum satisfaction from whatsoever they have. Instead of satisfying the maximum wants with limited resources, Gandhi advocated a completely different way of looking at this problem. He advocated wantlessness. And he was of the opinion that wants are the sources of pain. How is this so? A want is a painful experience because we wish to satisfy it and want to get rid of it as soon as possible. To remove a want means removal of pain and procurement of pleasure. And this pleasure is the same thing as satisfaction or utility. If one wants to get maximum pleasure, one should see to it that all pain is removed and no fresh pain is experienced in future. At least this is the ideal for anyone who wants to achieve maximum pleasure from his or her limited resources. So as he wrote in From Yerwada Mandir, we should not receive any single thing that we do not need. According to Gandhi, most of us improperly multiply our wants, and thus we unconsciously make thieves of ourselves. If we try, we can get rid of quite a number of our wants. And an individual who follows the observance of non-stealing will bring about a progressive reduction of wants. Because much of the distressing poverty in the world has arisen out of the breaches of the principle of non-stealing. So it is because we take from others that we enrich ourselves. The fundamental basis of these relationships are exploitative, as was very, very well understood by Gandhi. Whoever appropriates more than the minimum that is really necessary is guilty of theft. And accumulating commodities cramps the soul. There is a fetish of external goods of life. The luxury of the ascendant classes, therefore, makes them morally deprived. So this kind of fetishization of commodities, fetishization of material goods, results in a situation where the upper classes who have more goods, who have more luxuries, according to Gandhi, their moral character or their morality is compromised. The monopolization of the things needed by all, by a very few people at the top, is fundamentally unjust. So basically, this kind of monopolization by a small section of the society results in the larger section of society being deprived of their wants, and this cannot be justified under any circumstances. Accumulation is condemnable according to Gandhi because it is not possible to be practiced by all. And very, very importantly, and this is such an important statement, accumulation by a few amounts to the dispossession of the many. Another very, very important aspect in the Gandhian way of life or in the Gandhian prescription is that of renunciation and redistribution. According to him, accumulation spells death, whereas renunciation is life. One must give up attachment to wealth. We may earn, but dedicate ourselves to the service of all. And the best and the most effective mantra is to enjoy our wealth by renouncing it. So by all means, we should earn. We should earn as much as we can. However, whatever we earn is something that is for the social good. It is for the larger good of society. And what he basically said was that we should understand that wealth is not yours. It belongs to the people. Take what you require for your legitimate needs and use the remainder for society. Let's talk a little bit about how Gandhi actually brought ethics into economics. He offered his doctrine of non-possession as an indictment or as a major critique of the drive for multiplication of wants that was fueled by an insatiable propensity for superfluous consumption. To Gandhi, ethics and economics are inseparable. Non-possession, according to him, is actually a positive doctrine because it teaches that everyone should limit their wants and spend the rest for the welfare of others. This is a desirable and non-violent method of reducing inequality of income distribution and redistribution of wealth. Gandhi was aware that other methods of income distribution may include the coercive power of the state, and therefore he put the utmost reliance on the individual and his or her moral awakening to bring these radical changes in the distribution of income and wealth in the society through wantlessness. To sum up, Gandhi said that the world will live in peace only when the individuals composing it make up their mind to do so. Human beings will have to realize that a way of life that rapidly depletes the power of earth, instead of sustaining it, piles up more and more insoluble problems for each succeeding generation. And these can only be called violent means. Our urgent task is to follow a non-violent way of life in economics, not merely the violence of humans against each other, but also violence in our dealings with other living creatures and the limited and finite resources of the earth. A new approach is required to redirect human society involving a huge effort of understanding, imagination, and political and moral resolve. Human beings have to explore their goals and values and show commitment to ensure that we will survive without falling into a state of worthless existence. And more people all over the world should look for the ways to redirect economic and ecological systems as if people mattered. Thank you.